Imagine catching an employee, like literally stealing from the company safe on crystal clear security footage.
Right, which is a nightmare for any manager.
Exactly. And in a place like New York or London, I mean, they are fired by noon, right? They're packing their desk into a cardboard box, security is escorting them out, and the whole thing is basically over before lunch.
Oh, absolutely. It's immediate.
But in Vietnam, you actually have to send that exact same employee a calendar invite for a formal meeting 5 days from now, just to talk about the theft.
Yeah, it's a profound culture shock for any foreign executive just, stepping off the plane.
I can imagine.
Because the leverage in a Western at-will employment system sits almost entirely with the employer. The business has total flexibility.
Which obviously leaves the worker in a pretty precarious position.
Exactly. But the Vietnamese system operates on a completely different paradigm. The state places these massive, deeply entrenched procedural shields right around the worker.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because today, you and I are digging into this fascinating stack of legal advisory notes, corporate briefings, and even a landmark 2023 Supreme Court ruling from Vietnam.
It's a lot of dense material, but it's so important.
It really is. And our mission for this deep dive is to decode the incredibly intricate rules of terminating employment there. We're going to explore that super fine line between a legal corporate restructuring and an illegal termination.
Which is a line a lot of companies trip over.
Right. And we want to extract some essential lessons on what happens when fast-moving global business clashes with a system designed from the ground up to protect the local workforce.
And honestly, that clash is a massive hurdle for foreign direct investment. You have these multinational companies pouring into the country, and they fully expect to operate their HR departments the way they do in Chicago or Berlin.
Just copy-paste the corporate handbook.
Exactly. And then they hit this absolute wall of worker-centric legislation. If they try to force their usual methods, they end up in court facing just catastrophic financial penalties.
Well, let's start with the most common reason a company might want to let someone go, which is poor performance. I think this is where we really see how different this framework is from the global norm.
Oh, definitely. The contrast is huge.
But before we even get to the firing part, we need to know who exactly is protected. Because the 2019 Labor Code significantly broadened the definition of an employee. It essentially closes the loopholes of the modern gig economy, right?
Yeah, they cast a very wide net with that 2019 update. The law now states that anyone working under an agreement, receiving a salary, and operating under management supervision is classified as an employee.
So it doesn't matter what the contract says at the top.
Not at all. It does not matter if the corporate paperwork calls them an independent contractor or like a freelance consultant. If those three elements exist, agreement, pay, and supervision, they are an employee.
Wow. So the courts will just look right past the job title.
Yep, they look past the title and apply the full protection of the labor code.
I also read they recognize e-contracts now, which makes sense for the remote landscape. And the probation period for enterprise managers has been pushed up to 180 days.
Which gives companies a bit more breathing room for top-level hires.
Right. But let's look at a scenario where someone is past probation, they're a full employee, and they are just, consistently failing at their job.
Okay, the classic underperformer.
Yeah. The law states a company can terminate an employee if they have, quote, frequently failed to complete their work. I mean, I have to imagine that phrase alone causes endless boardroom arguments.
Oh, it's a nightmare.
Frequently failed is the great ambiguous hurdle of Vietnamese labor law, because the legislation intentionally does not define what frequently actually means.
That sounds incredibly frustrating for a manager.
It is. And more importantly, it doesn't allow a frustrated manager to unilaterally decide what failure looks like in the heat of the moment. A company absolutely must have a formal, written, internal performance policy.
And I'm guessing you can't just draft that in an afternoon and email it out. No, not at all. You cannot just draft it in isolation. It must be actively consulted with the internal trade union and the employee representative group to hold any legal weight whatsoever.
It sounds like getting a speeding ticket in a town that never actually posted the speed limit.
That is a perfect way to put it.
I mean, if you don't have that locally validated policy, you can't prove they broke the rules. So if a global company catches an employee failing, say, 2 or 3 times on a major project, can they just cut their losses and fire them on the spot?
What's fascinating here is that firing on the spot for performance is basically the fastest way to guarantee a wrongful termination lawsuit. A few instances of poor performance simply do not meet the legal threshold.
Wait, really? 2 or 3 big mistakes aren't enough?
Nope. And this is the exact trap foreign multinationals fall into. They rely on vague, global parent company policies that were, drafted on another continent.
Right, some generic corporate handbook.
Exactly. A generic employee handbook from corporate headquarters holds absolutely zero weight in a Vietnamese court. If the performance metric wasn't issued locally and it didn't go through that union consultation process, it essentially does not exist.
So you have a software developer or a sales manager who is objectively dragging the team down, and you can't just let them go, and you can't rely on your global handbook. What is the actual mechanism to get them out of the company?
Well, you have to construct an airtight paper trail. You need to prove a pattern of failure against that specific, locally validated performance policy we just talked about.
Which takes a lot of time.
It does. And this brings us to the Performance Improvement Plan, or PIP. Now, interestingly, a PIP is not explicitly written into the Vietnamese labor code as a strict requirement.
Seriously. With all these other rigid rules, the PIP isn't actually mandated.
I know it sounds counterintuitive, but it isn't mandated by statute. However, it is the ultimate legal safeguard. Because when a wrongful termination case goes to trial, courts demand clear, written records. A well-documented PIP proved the employer acted in good faith before resorting to termination.
Ah, so it shows you tried to help them.
Exactly. It demonstrates the company gave the employee clear targets, a fair time frame to correct the behavior, and a genuine opportunity to succeed. If the employee still fails after that structured intervention, then the employer finally has the objective evidence needed to satisfy that frequently failed requirement.
I can easily see a frustrated executive looking at this months-long PIP process, the required union consultations, the local policy drafting, and deciding it is entirely too much work.
Oh, they do. All the time.
They might just think, you know what, let's just eliminate the job entirely. We'll restructure the department and lay them off.
Right. The restructuring pivot. It's a very common and very risky corporate maneuver. The law does allow for termination due to technological or structural changes.
So there is a loophole.
Sort of. It's meant to cover genuine business evolutions, like factory automation, completely changing a product line, or going through a merger and acquisition.
But again, based on these sources, this isn't a shortcut. To execute a structural change legally, the company has to draft a comprehensive labor utilization plan, right?
Yes, a very detailed plan.
And they have to consult the union again. Plus, they have to notify the Provincial People's Committee, which is essentially the highest local government authority in that region, a full 30 days in advance of the layoff.
And don't forget the financial cost. They owe the departing worker severance, calculated at 1 month of salary for every year worked, with a minimum payout of 2 months.
So the administrative burden is heavy by design.
Exactly. The state wants to make mass layoffs difficult to protect the stability of the workforce. But because the hurdle is so high, companies frequently try to cheat the system using what we can call the fake department loophole.
Yes, I saw this specific trap highlighted in the corporate advisory notes. A company will dissolve their, say, marketing department, lay off the underperforming staff claiming a structural change, and then 2 weeks later magically launch a brand growth department that does the exact same daily tasks.
A classic maneuver.
But if a company attempts this fake department trick, who actually polices the difference? How does a judge sitting in a courtroom differentiate between a genuine pivot in business strategy and a thinly veiled excuse to fire someone?
The courts actually police it quite rigorously. They look straight through the changing of nameplates on office doors.
So a new title doesn't fool them.
Not at all. The core legal test the judges apply is whether there's an actual objective surplus of labor. They look at the substance of the daily operations, not the titles on the organizational chart.
How do they figure that out?
They will literally interview the remaining staff. If you fire someone because their role is supposedly redundant, but the core daily tasks of that role still exist and have simply been shifted to someone else's desk, that is not a structural change.
Ah, I see.
That is an illegal termination, masked as a layoff. The boundary between a legal strategic shift and an illegal firing is incredibly fragile.
Here's where it gets really interesting. We've established you cannot easily fire someone for just being bad at their job, and you cannot fake a restructuring without the courts catching on.
Right.
So what happens when the employee does something actually malicious?
No.
We are talking about severe misconduct now. The 2019 Labor Code outlines 4 strict forms of discipline, right? Reprimand, delaying wage increases for up to 6 months, demotion, and finally, dismissal.
Yes, and disciplinary dismissal is the most severe action an employer can take. It is reserved for acts like theft, drug use at the workplace, or revealing sensitive trade secrets.
Which makes sense.
And the 2019 code also introduced a vital modernization. It now explicitly includes sexual harassment at the workplace as a ground for dismissal, provided the company has defined it clearly in their internal labor regulations.
The 2019 code also threw a few lifelines to employers dealing with extreme cases. Like, a company can now unilaterally terminate an employee who goes completely
Yeah,
so-
the 5-day rule.
right, absent for 5 consecutive working days or 20 days in a year without a legitimate reason like a natural disaster or a certified medical emergency.
Which was a huge relief for businesses.
And providing false information during the hiring process is also a new ground for instant termination.
Exactly. Those updates solved a massive headache for HR departments. Before 2019, dealing with an employee who simply ghosted the company was a procedural nightmare of sending certified letters to empty apartments.
I can't even imagine. But for almost any other type of misconduct, the formal disciplinary process remains incredibly rigid.
Highly rigid.
Let's talk about that rigidity because it brings us back to that security camera example from the beginning. The sources outline a process where you have to catch the act, record the evidence, and then send a formal meeting invite 5 days in advance of the disciplinary hearing.
Yep, 5 clear days.
And that meeting must include the internal union representative and even the employee's parents if the worker happens to be under 15.
That's right.
Plus, the decision has to be issued within a strict statute of limitations, usually 6 months from the incident. I mean, it sounds like defusing a bomb. You're trying to cut a wire to save the company, but you have to fill out 6 months of paperwork before you can safely snip it.
That is a perfect way to visualize it. You cannot bypass the procedure, no matter how egregious the offense.
Even for something obvious like theft.
Even for theft. If you catch an employee stealing on a Monday, you cannot simply demand their badge and tell them to leave the property.
Wow.
You have to secure the evidence.
Right?
You might suspend them temporarily, which, by the way, comes with its own strict rules and partial pay requirements. And then you must convene that formal disciplinary hearing with the required 5-day notice.
That seems so incredibly counterintuitive to a fast-moving business environment. Why force a company to sit across a table from a known thief 5 days after the fact?
Well, the underlying philosophy of the law is really interesting here. The system is fundamentally designed to prevent emotional, split-second retaliatory firings by powerful executives.
So it's a forced cooling off period.
Exactly. The state demands due process above all else. It ensures the employee has time to prepare a defense, perhaps gather their own evidence, and it ensures the union is present in the room to witness that the employer is acting based on facts, not anger.
And if you skip a step?
Skipping even one single administrative step like forgetting to invite the union rep, missing that 5-day notice window, or having an executive without the proper legal authority sign the final, invalidates the entire firing. The procedure is just as important as the misconduct itself.
So what does this all mean when a foreign entity, totally unfamiliar with these deeply ingrained cultural and legal rules, just ignores the wire and cuts it anyway? What happens when they fire someone the way they would in their home country?
It becomes a profoundly expensive lesson in the realities of local compliance.
Yeah, one of our sources details a perfect cautionary tale about a European logistics company operating in Ho Chi Minh City.
Oh, I remember that one.
They had a mid-level manager who was underperforming. The foreign HR team, likely frustrated and unaware of the local procedures, just terminated him. No dialogue, no formal 5-day notice, no PIP. They just let him go.
Big mistake.
Yeah, the employee complained to the local authorities, and the result was mandatory reinstatement with 6 months of back pay.
The financial avalanche of an illegal termination is just staggering, because if a court rules the firing was illegal, the employer's first legal obligation is to reinstate the worker to their original position.
Which is wild. I cannot imagine anything more awkward than being forced to bring back an employee you just spent months battling in court.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't even want to return to a company that illegally fired me.
And the law actually accounts for that exact dynamic. If the employee refuses to return to that hostile environment, the company is still on the hook for massive payouts.
So they can't just walk away free and clear.
Not even close. First, they must pay the employee's full salary, plus their social and health insurance contributions for all the days they were not allowed to work.
And court cases take a long time.
Exactly. Court cases in Vietnam can drag on for a year or more, meaning the clock is constantly ticking on that back pay while the lawyers argue. On top of that, there is a mandatory penalty payment of at least 2 months' salary.
Wow.
The state can also hit the company with administrative fines up to 80 million VND. And finally, they have to pay standard severance.
It's a compounding financial disaster. Even if you are firing someone completely legally, the notice periods alone require long-term planning, right? Like 45 days for indefinite contracts, 30 days for fixed term, and up to 120 days for specialized sectors.
Yeah, you have to plan way ahead.
It sounds like a company could bleed cash for over a year just trying to execute a single termination. How quickly do employees actually have to file these lawsuits?
The time frame to challenge a dismissal gives the worker plenty of time to prepare. An employee has 180 days to file a formal complaint with the labor inspector and a full year from the date of the firing to take the case to court.
A full year. That's a lot of lingering risk for the company.
It is. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this entire legal architecture fundamentally shifts the leverage away from the corporation and places it firmly in the hands of the worker.
It really does.
The potential cost of getting a termination wrong is so disproportionately high that employers are practically forced to act methodically, carefully, and fairly. You simply cannot manage by intimidation when the employee holds this much legal power.
To really ground all these abstract rules, procedures, and penalties in reality, let's look at the ultimate case study from our sources. This is a landmark legal battle that went all the way to Vietnam's Supreme Court, known officially as Precedent 70.
Yes, Anlet 70.
Right. It perfectly illustrates how these complexities play out and how employees sometimes try to use these protections as like an offensive weapon.
It's a brilliant case study because it involves the intersection of standard employment contracts and the incredibly strong special protections afforded to union officials.
So here's the setup for you listening. We have an employee named Vuong Quoc An working for a company called Katie Vietnam. He was originally hired in 2015 on a standard one-year fixed-term contract.
Pretty standard so far.
But during that first year, Anna was elected as the chairman of the grassroots trade union at the company. Now, by law, a union official's employment contract must automatically be extended until their union term ends.
Because the state does not want companies firing union leaders just because their standard work contract happens to expire while they're actively protecting workers' rights.
Makes total sense. So the company complied with the law. They extended his employment contract to November 2016 to perfectly match the end of his union term.
That was the legally pristine move. The company recognized the protective shield around union leaders. However, they also made it abundantly clear in writing that once that legal extension was up in November 2016, they had no intention of renewing his employment.
They were just counting down the days until they could legally part ways.
Exactly.
But Anna pulls a truly audacious maneuver here. Just before his term ends, in October 2016, literally 1 month before his contract is set to expire, the union holds an election. And miraculously, Anna is reelected as chairman for a brand new 5-year term stretching all the way to 2021.
He essentially tried to reset the clock on his own protective shield.
Yes, he basically dared the company to fire him. He tried to use the union election mechanism to legally force the company to employ him for another half-decade.
But Katie Vietnam called his bluff.
They did. When his extension ended the following month, they terminated him. An immediately sued the company for hundreds of millions of VND, claiming he was illegally fired while serving as an elected union boss.
And the resulting legal chess match really exposes how courts interpret the boundaries of these laws.
Because it bounced around the courts a bit, right?
It did. The initial trial court sided with the company, validating the termination, but Anna appealed the decision, and the appellate court actually reversed it.
So he won the appeal.
Yes. They sided with An, ordering the company to pay the massive back pay and penalties, citing the strict statute that protects union leaders from termination.
But the company refuses to back down. The Chief Justice of the High Court steps in to protest the appellate ruling, and the case gets elevated all the way to the cassation level, which operates like the Supreme Court. They establish Precedent 70. So how did they finally untangle this?
Well, the Supreme Court overturned the appellate court and handed the ultimate victory back to the company by looking at the rules governing the union itself.
Okay.
They examined the guidelines from the General Confederation of Labor, which is the national overarching governing body for all trade unions in Vietnam.
And what did those rules say?
Those national rules clearly state that for a candidate to even be eligible to run for a union leadership role, they must have enough time left on their current employment contract to serve at least half of the upcoming union term.
Ah. And since An only had 1 single month left on his contract in October, He mathematically couldn't serve half of a 5-year term.
Precisely. The Supreme Court ruled that his re-election in October was procedurally invalid from the absolute start.
Wow.
Because he was not legally eligible to be the union chairman anymore, that protective shield completely evaporated. The company was entirely within its rights to let his contract naturally expire in November.
This raises an important question, though. Why is this specific ruling so vital for the business landscape in Vietnam that it was elevated to the status of an official legal precedent?
It establishes a crucial boundary of good faith. Vietnam's labor laws are designed to fiercely protect union rights, ensuring leaders are never intimidated, silenced, or fired for organizing workers. That is foundational to the system.
Right, the worker comes first.
But precedent, 70 signals to the entire country that courts must balance that fierce protection against blatant bad faith abuses by employees. It prevents workers from weaponizing union procedures to trap employers in endless, forced employment contracts.
It proves there's a limit.
Yes, it proves that while the system heavily favors the worker, it still demands honesty and legitimate procedure from both sides of the table.
It is a masterclass in legal nuance, and, it really brings our journey today full circle. Whether you are a global manager planning a massive corporate expansion into Southeast Asia, an investor analyzing supply chain risks, or just someone endlessly curious about how different cultures value labor, Vietnam offers an incredible lesson.
It's a completely different rulebook.
It really is. Understanding these rules is not just about avoiding a devastating financial penalty. It's about understanding and respecting a distinctly different business culture, one where the worker's livelihood, stability, and dignity are treated with intense gravity by the state.
You simply cannot copy and paste your corporate culture across international borders. You have to adopt your psychology to the local reality, where due process, paper trails, and employee protection are paramount.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to ponder. We've just spent this entire deep dive examining a labor system that is highly structured, deeply entrenched, and rigidly protective of traditional full-time employment.
Very traditional.
But the global economy is shifting rapidly under our feet. We are accelerating toward remote gig work, freelance contracting across borders, and AI automation that displaces traditional roles entirely.
The landscape is totally changing.
So how will nations with deeply entrenched laws like Vietnam's adapt to that incredibly fluid future? Will these rigid, highly protective structures become a vital sanctuary for workers in an increasingly unstable global market? Or will they ultimately become a barrier to the future of borderless employment?
It's arguably the defining labor question of the next decade.
It really is. Remember, in some parts of the world, you can lose your entire livelihood on a Tuesday just for wearing the wrong shoes to the office. But in Vietnam, you might have to give 30 days notice to the local government just to change a job title on an org chart. Two very different worlds operating in one global economy. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the systems around you.